Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first session after the keynote. I will talk about Axon framework. It's a CQRS approach towards microservices. My name is Rajani. I work for Blue Harvest as a lead software engineer. And Blue Harvest is an elite engineering unit of Capgemini. And this means that I'm actually a developer. So I do coding every day. And my blue attire is not something related to my company's name. So don't guess that. And apart from coding, I love cooking. And I also like to play table tennis. So that was about me. And today, I will talk about some basic concept of CQRS. I will also talk about event sourcing. I'll take you how Axon can help with CQRS as well as with event sourcing. And I will also show it in practice how we can use Axon. And in the end, I will give you some tips about making proper decision for your application. So that will be the agenda for the session. So my first encounter with CQRS, basically, it happened after my marriage. Oh, sorry, not this picture. This one, sorry. So the marriage is really exciting. First 6 months are very confusing as well. So your wife tells you a lot, and you try to interpret it differently. And as a backend developer, you are always eager to respond quickly. That is also a bad thing. So sometimes it used to happen that my wife used to tell me that I'm so tired. And all of a sudden, I used to answer, oh, OK, you should get a coffee. But that is not what she meant. She meant that you should make a coffee for me, or you should order pizza for dinner. So this was basically a command that I couldn't understand. Similarly, sometimes she tells that I'm going out for shopping. And obviously, I used to tell her that, honey, I'm coming with you. But that is not what she wanted. She wanted her own time. She wanted that I should only listen to her and do my own job. And that is something, is an event. You need to listen to that event, and you are not required to do some command there. Sometimes she asks me, what did Laura wear in the party yesterday? This is a tricky question, and if you are not spontaneous, you say red mini skirt with blue stripe blouse. Come on, you should never answer this. This is basically a query, but yeah, you should know what you should answer at that time. I took this metaphor because I think we are also doing the same thing with our conventional web application. So what we do is we have the database and also the model, which are exactly the same copy, in a way. And when we start writing our UI, we also try to adjust the UI as per the model, or model a little bit with the UI. And sometimes we write handlers in between, or maybe some wrappers to format the data properly. What CQRS says that you should never use the same model for read and write. So it says that you should divide this model into two sets, one for query, one for command. So command takes care of all the updates, whereas query takes care of all the read operation. But if you do that, you may also need to write different handlers, one for query and one for command. Sometimes, if you want, you can also go with another extent. You can also divide the database between two. You can create a write database for command, and you can also create a database for read operation. But if you do that, you also need a synchronization between these two. That is required. So CQRS, it means, in simple words, separating out reads from writes. Its full form is command query responsibility segregation. And this is a design pattern that originated with domain-driven design. And with microservices, it also picked up recently. So this was about CQRS. I will not talk more in depth on CQRS because I also want to cover Axon more. Another technology that we will see is event sourcing. So you all must have heard about event-driven architecture. And in this architecture, you can see a lot of patterns, like event swarming, event sourcing, and you can also see retroactive event. So event sourcing is one of them. So it is not the entire architecture, but it's a pattern within that. And it says that all the changes that you do to your application state should be persisted as a sequence of events. So in conventional database, for example, if we have a table for order, whenever we add any product into the cart, we generally put the status. So if the user goes on paying the order, we change the status from in process to paid. But we update the same row. If the order is delivered, we change the status again to shipped. So we are changing the same row again and again. Where in event sourcing, we basically create an event saying that item has been added. And if the user pays for that item, we generally put another event, say order paid event. And same order, if it is delivered, we also create another event called event delivered event, order delivered event. But we do not change the same event again and again. We create a new event, and we put it into the event store. So that's the difference between conventional and event sourcing paradigm. And as you see that we are adding too much of events in the event store, that can little bit affect also the performance. But nowadays there are very good event stores. But to tackle this situation, you can also create a snapshot, which is the snapshot of the application state at a given time. And if you want to start with a scratch database, you can also replay all those events on that plain database to come to a particular point in time in history. But whatever you do, you need to make sure that you don't change the thumb rule. That is, you should never change the event that already occurred. So you should never change it in any case. This seems a bit illogical from a software point of view, but if we look at accounting, for example, we never change the ledger entries. If we make a wrong credit entry, we make another reciprocating debit entry. We never change it, and we humans are very used to of this. Now, I was also using a word event store a couple of times. So that is the database where we will save those events. And event store, maybe RDBMS, NoSQL, is a big question. I'll talk about Axon DB, and I'll show what can be the criteria for selecting a proper event store. At that time, we will see whether RDBMS can be a good choice or not. Nowadays, whenever you hear about CQRS, you also hear that CQRS and event sourcing both are used together. I obviously believe that CQRS loves event sourcing, but that is not true that you have to use event sourcing if you are using CQRS. And also vice versa is not true. So if you both use combined, it is good, but you can also use individually as well. So if you use the CQRS and event sourcing, you also need to do a lot of things in the background. For example, you need to have command bus, query bus. You also need to have proper architecture for the handlers for event or maybe for event sourcing. But this kind of things, it's very tedious to do. So Axon comes into the picture. Axon helps with implementing those basic components. It's an open source Java framework that supports CQRS and event sourcing. And I like Axon because it is very lightweight. It is very easy to scale components within the application, and also the components provided by Axon very easily. And it is also extensible. So if you want to bring your own event store, you can also bring your event store to integrate with Axon. Now the question is whether it is mature enough. If you look at the number of downloads, it already exceeded 1 million. And if we look at the industry that is using Axon, We have some clients from the financial domain. We also have some from logistic like UPS and FedEx. And there are also clients from casino. So they are spread across the multiple domain. When I was talking to Ellard, he also, who made this framework, he also said that the earlier adopters were actually hospital. And that also surprised me a lot, but yeah. So the framework itself is mature enough to use. Now I'll discuss about the modules, but please note that this is as per Axon 3. Before 15 days, they launched new version, Axon 4. They also updated documentation recently. So there is a change, little change, but I didn't get enough time to cover it for this presentation. So the main module is the core module of the Axon that provides the basic implementation for the command bus and also the query bus. There is also a good module for Spring Boot. You can also have a lot of auto configuration using this module. They also provide a test module which provides fixtures, and fixtures provides basic infrastructure for running your tests within Axon. They also provide some smaller libraries for connecting different applications. For example, you can use MongoDB as an event store as well as Saga store. You can use Kafka as event bus. You can use any AMQP broker using this module. And maybe you can also extend your command bus from one node to multiple nodes using distributed command bus module. And Axon IQ, apart from Axon Framework, also provides other products like Axon Hub, which is a unified messaging platform for commands, queries, and events. They also provide Axon DB, which is an event store. And recently, with that announcement, they combined these two products as Axon Server. So maybe if I do another talk somewhere, then I will use Axon Server definitely. They also provide a GDPR module, and this shows how the company is responsive towards the environment and also the context where you are operating. Because with the European GDPR regulation, they provided a way to encrypt or delete the event data that is stored already and which you are not allowed to save it as per the regulation. Obviously, it is not allowed, but it provides a way where you can encrypt those things. I will quickly list down some of the features of Axon Hub and Axon DB. I will show it also how it works in practice. Axon Hub, as I said, is a unified messaging platform for commands, events, and query. It does intelligent routing of those within the application, and you can have it configured with almost zero configuration. For this demo, I only put one line and it is configured. It also provides location transparency. So if you have multiple components in your application, one component is not required to know where another component is running. I'll show you this in practice today. Axon DB. Axon DB is the event store provided by Axon IQ, and it works very well with Axon Framework and Axon Hub. And as I said, for Axon Hub, Axon DB also requires almost no configuration. And it does not rely on any underlying database. It has its own flat file structure to manage those. And it also provides you a UI to run ad hoc queries if you want to run on your events. The criteria that I was talking about the event store, I listed in this slide. So Axon DB is an append-only store. So you are not allowed to change any events that already occurred. And that is something that you should really look when you are selecting an event store. If you select RDBMS as event store, you cannot restrict those kind of things. Axon DB also divides the entire stream into multiple segments. So if you need to retrieve events, it is quite quick compared to NoSQL and RDBMS. By default, it provides searching backwards in the time. So recent events are retrieved first. And it supports creation of the snapshots, which is something that is very useful for event store. There are other event stores supported by Axon framework, like JPA-based stores, JDBC-based stores. MongoDB is supported. There is also an in-memory event store, which you can use for quick demos. And you can also forward events to any AMQP message broker. So that was about the theory. And as a developer, you always you like practical more than theory, so I'll quickly shift to that. For the demo, I created a small application which has 3 microservices. Yeah, microservices is like a religion now, so I call them microservices, but yeah, I'm open for any debate. So in this application, I have a UI service, which is a Vaadin-based UI, and which generates commands and queries. The commands and queries are forwarded to Axon Hub. Axon Hub is it doesn't save the events on its own, so it needs Axon DB for saving the events, and it forwards all those commands to account service, and account service after validating the commands generates events, and those events are handled by query service, and the query service puts that information in MySQL database to maintain the current state. We call it projections. I've shown a dotted line between Axon DB and MySQL. It is just because it happens via query service, but it maintains the current state. So I'll show you this application. So before starting the presentation, I started Axon DB. And I also started Axon Hub. And whenever you start them, you should check on the overview page that Axon Hub is connected with Axon DB. I hope it is visible for everyone. So this is the UI for Axon Hub, and this is the UI for Axon DB. And you can here do search on your existing events. So these are the events that I created during my practice. I'll take you to the IntelliJ now. So as I said, the application has 3 microservices. I hope the structure is visible to everyone. Please let me know if it isn't. And there is a MB common, which contains the commands and events. They are basically, it contains all those POJOs required by all 3 services. The MB account is, I'll show you the code. Let me close all those open files. The account application, this is Vanilla's Spring Boot application. I think it doesn't require any explanation. So this is the aggregate that I created. It's an account aggregate. For those who doesn't know about domain-driven design, aggregate is a entity or a group of entity. For simplicity, I prefer a simple entity. And whenever you use aggregate, you also need to define an aggregate identifier. And once you define the aggregate, you need to write commands that will operate on this aggregate. So I created 3 commands here. One is for opening the account. Sorry, I didn't explain about the domain. The application is for bank. Obviously, it's a too large domain, but for this, it is a mini bank. So, so this command basically creates an account. Second command is the withdraw money command, and third is the deposit money command. So whenever you use an aggregate, you need to take care of 2 things, decision and state change. So the command handler, basically, they are kind of request. So you do all those business validation there, and they decide whether it is okay to go further, and they generate events. An event is like a statement, so it is always used in past form. So for this, I use the account created event. And the apply method is basically provided by Axon. So this will put the event into the event bus. And here I have mentioned two event sourcing handlers. One is for account created event, and second is for balance update event. And balance update event is the parent class for deposit money and withdraw money. So it can handle both those operations. Okay, until now, you didn't see any code where I was connecting to Axon Hub or anything related to the client. Yeah? That I have done via the POM file. So here, is it visible to everyone? Yeah. Okay, so this is the auto configuration dependency I've added. This automatically creates an Axon Hub client and also creates all the components required. If you don't use a Spring Boot, you can also use Axon non-Spring client that is also available. But if you use this, the moment you start the application, it does two things. It instantiates the Axon Hub command handler, and it also provides all this information to Axon Hub that these are the handlers that we have defined in our component. So let's start this component. This is also a bad habit of a developer. You always put on debug rather than run. I hope there is no breakpoints in my code. Okay, so this is up, and now let's go into Axon Hub. You can immediately see that the MB account is configured. And if I double-click on this, it also shows which command handlers are defined in the component. So it reads for these three commands. And the only configuration I put here is this line. It says where I can find the Axon Hub server. So it's, I hope this is visible. Yeah. So this is the only configuration I put here. Now, if I look at the MB queries, which is the reading part of the application, so this also basically is a vanilla Spring Boot application. It does, this is very plain. And it also has some event handlers and repository. I created repositories so that I can persist information into MySQL database. And the event handlers, they are listening to the events for account creation and also the balance change. So here I have defined the event handlers with the Axon annotation. And this query handlers, they are used for Vaadin UI. So whenever I want to show information on Vaadin UI, it will generate the queries. And due to Vaadin's own structure, I had to create two queries. But yeah, this is for only managing the UI. Okay, so if I open the configuration for this application, this also contains only one configuration, same as accounts. And apart from that, here I have defined the tracking processors. So this tracking processor continuously checks with the event store whether any event occurred or not. And if there's an event, they also manage the token for that, so they know from where they need to start synchronizing those. And this will give event to the event handler, and then event handler can make the projection. So let's start the query as well. This will take time because it will also validate the schema with MySQL. And if we go to overview, the MB queries is here. And if we double click on this, it will also show the tracking processor. You can also stop it if you want. And it will also mention what queries it can handle. Now, I will show you the UI part. So this is the UI application, again Spring Boot. And this is the Vaadin UI code. I will not go into depth for explaining Vaadin, but I can show you this code. It is for creating the account. Let's start the UI so that you can also visualize things. Let's start the app first. So I'm starting it. Okay, set this up. Let's go back. Oh, what happened? I failed again? No. Oh, sorry. This is not something that will appear here because in accounts we had some command handlers, so Axon can easily see it. In query is a component, it had query handler, so it can immediately registers with Axon Hub. But with UI, we don't have any handler, so it will not recognize the UI as a component. But the moment you run the first command or query, it will recognize and it will put it there on your overview. So for UI, I'm not creating any handlers. I'm only sending commands and queries. So this is the create account panel. Let's see whether it still works. Finger crossed. Oh, it works. So the account has been created. I can also show you in the Axon DB that there was an event. So here it says account created event with the information that we passed on. Clear? And if we, I didn't open the MySQL database, but let's do that as well. So I should have kept it open. Okay, so the projection has been created. So for this, in the bank UI, where I have defined the add account panel, I have defined a click a listener for the button, the create button, and at that time I'm using the command gateway, and command gateway is already injected by Spring automatically. So this command gateway is used to send this command, create account command, on the command bus, and then Axon Hub finds out who is handling this event command, sorry, and then it passes the console to that command handler. And here in the command handler, as I have already shown, it creates an event which will be handled by event sourcing handler, and this event sourcing handler will do the state change actually in the event store, and then it will be handled by the tracking processor in the MB queries, and it will do a projection in the MySQL database. So this was about how the entire application works with sending commands and queries. I'll also show you the queries. In account summary data provider, I basically injected query handler, and this query handler, I send it via the constructor, and here it creates a query and puts it onto the query bus. So it is almost the same, but it is passed on to the another component. I also mentioned that it is very easy to scale it up. So let's see how we can do that. So I'm copying this configuration of the accounts, and I'm putting a second. This is only for showing the right name on the Axon Hub. And if I run this, it should appear on the Axon Hub once it is up. You see it? So it's very easy to run as many commands as you want. And if you go to the commands view, it tells you how many handlers you have, and also shows how many commands has already been executed. So let's see if I run another command. Yeah, I'm a bit lazy now. So it sends it to the second. So if you, for the developer edition, it only supports round robin routing. So if you prefer the Enterprise Edition, you can do more routing options. And this way, also, you can run any instance of the Axon Hub, and it will automatically be added into your overview. And one node will become master based on the configuration. The last thing I want to show in my demo is a test, because I spent a lot of time to learn TDD, and now I think I want to keep that practice on. So let's see about test. So in Axon, they provide a given when then scenario kind of testing. So you can define what's the current state of the event store, and then you can also specify in the when scenario if you run any command and what you can expect after that. Please note that in this case, Axon will create a special command gateway and query gateway for running the test. So this is really good from Axon Hub that the testability has been increased. So this was it for the demo. Let's go back to the last part of the presentation. Okay, this slide is for me, so that I make sure that I've shown everything. If you want the source code that I've shown here, you can use my public GitHub repository. And you can also download the Axon framework and other stuff from the download page. I hope Axon Hub and Axon DB will still be available after Axon server. Let's go to the last section, where we will discuss whether it is right fit for you or not. And whenever I have this question, I realize my situation when I go to a smart toilet, and the moment I'm settled down, the timer goes off, and it becomes dark. The entire focus shifts towards how to bring the light on now, and I'm waving my hands and trying. It's difficult, huh? So you need to be very sure that you are using the technology wisely. So if you talk about CQRS, CQRS can be a perfect fit if there is a large number of difference between the number of reads and write operation in your application. If you want to increase the performance of one of those components, majorly on the read side for us, but yeah, there can be a write-intensive application as well. If your team structure is divided into a situation where one team focuses on analytics and showing the reports and read-related operation, where another team focuses on write-related operation like collecting the data, saving it into the database, then I think the CQRS can be a right fit for you. But there are situations where you should not use CQRS. And the first situation can be the simplest business logic. If your business logic is very, very simple, like my mini bank, it can be a monolith. But if your application is not complex, you should not use CQRS. And there's also a very good point that you should never use CQRS as a strategy. This is a big sentence. It took for me also to explain a little bit. That when you use a strategy, you apply the entire strategy towards the application, entire application. So domain-driven design can be a strategy. CQRS can be a tactic. So you apply CQRS on smaller portion of the application. For example, user management can be CRUD. User access can be CQRS. So you have to be really wise about selecting right strategy and right tactic. For event sourcing, it is a perfect fit if you want to have extremely detailed audit log. And if you also want an ability to revert back in past, then also event sourcing is a perfect fit for you. If your application involves a lot of delta changes into the state, I think event sourcing can be a right fit for you. But there are cases where event sourcing is not right fit. For example, if your application cannot deal with the eventual consistency, I always, when I upload a album in Facebook, my father is eagerly waiting for the album. It is not visible, it is not visible. It takes a while. Right now, the consistency has been improved a lot in CQRS and event sourcing based application, but still, there is a like micro or maybe nano second difference, and if your application cannot handle that, it is difficult. If your domain is too large, I think that event sourcing cannot be a right fit. When I showed this topic to Ellard, he also mentioned a really good point that the selection of the event sourcing should be based on aggregate rather than the domain. And that can also happen. If your schema is changing rapidly, maybe every day, then the event sourcing is not the right fit for you. And I'll also talk about the challenges so that you can correlate this point. So we were talking about both technologies, but there are some challenges. There are some frameworks available, but there are some challenges that you, first time adopt this, you have to take care of. So eventual consistency is the first challenge that you should deal with. Event versioning. So if your schema changes, if your event changes, you cannot go back in the past and change those. So the change in the event can be a challenge. And if you are new into this event sourcing practice, it may happen that you didn't model your events properly. And in that case, you are doing a lot of versioning. Event ordering. So you are sending a lot of events into the event bus. There can be chances that the events are not received in the right order. What happens, for example, there are two use cases which produces the same event, but in a different order. That can be a problem. So those are the challenges that you should really tackle while working on the event sourcing. Testability. It is not like normal CRUD where you can use the normal unit testing. Thanks to Axon, which provides this kind of test framework to support testing, but still testing is a challenge. It is not very easy. And for me, I think the biggest challenge is the people. You are not working alone. You are working with a team. And when you are working with a team, your team may be spread across departments, and then you are not speaking the same language. For event sourcing and CQRS, it is good if you use the same ubiquitous language. So you have to clearly define the bounded context. So how you will use this term in the domain model. And it is better if you do a lot of events storming session. You identify what events will be produced, how and who will consume. So those things, it is better to spend few hours on defining your events better than doing event versioning in the later stage. And with this, maybe you now know when to use CQRS and when to use event sourcing, but I will put a question to you, whether microservices is the right fit for you or not. So you should think this first, and I put the quotation from the Martin Fowler. He said that almost all the cases where he heard of a system which started as a microservices from scratch ended up with serious troubles. So think wisely about selecting a strategy or tactic. With this, if there are any Indians here, it is the biggest festival for them. And if you are after, you should be with your family or friends, and you are listening to me. So I would really like to wish you Happy New Year and Happy Diwali. And I will open the session for the question answer. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. But if you want to also see in every event how it changed, then it is better to keep it. Obviously, during the modeling, I didn't give in-depth thought about what is the right property for this thing. But yeah, it is good to have if you want to also track how the balance change with each event. But if you don't think that it is good, then you can also model it towards projections. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it is. When I was reading the book for the domain-driven design, they also said that you should only include those properties whose state you are changing with events in that aggregate. So if you think that property is not used, for example, the account name, which for my application, I didn't change it. So that can be omitted. Yeah, true. There was also one more hand raised from. Yes. There are two modes. One is the tracking mode, and one is the subscribing mode. And the difference is the pull and push strategy. I didn't try more on subscribing, but I think the difference is more towards these two concepts only. Yeah. There was one more hand raised from. Yeah, the aggregate itself was not persisted. Ideally, we shouldn't, because we are saving the aggregate in the event store. But yeah, if you want to have the projection, you can save it. So I didn't show you the common POJOs. So in there, I had the entity for account summary. So it basically is a subset or maybe it's a different set of properties that you want to project towards the database. Yes, please.
How do you check whether or not an account has already been created? So if you made a demo twice the same account with the same ID, how do you check it?
Yeah, it is a bit difficult because with domain-driven design, it is said that with write operation, you should not do the query operation. So in that case, it can be a little bit difficult. I didn't think about this question, but I think it's a good question. I'm not sure exactly how we can do that for time being. Yes.
How do you handle updates to the domain model? Because in your architecture, you separated the events and the commands into a shared domain model. Does that mean that you have to deploy multiple services at the same time or ordered?
No, it is not an order, because here also I started in I think for the UI, I'm doing the query call when the UI itself is loaded. So maybe for UI, I may need to start the query first, but it will not break, because the Vadin will refresh the data source when I do some action. So the order is not required, and the reason why I use the common, because there are POJOs, there are no extra configuration there. So it is not required that component has to be started within a given order.
If you add fields to your commands, or because you have a new version of your command, doesn't that mean that you have to deploy the applications that use those commands at the same time?
Yes, that's correct, because for commands, the accounts and UI, they are using the same POJOs. So in that case, we have to update both together. Yeah. Any further question? Yeah.
In the demo, I saw
Yeah. Actually, I should be using asynchronous operation there, but this was a synchronous operation. So I wanted to also refresh the data source immediately. So that's why I was waiting for the command to respond back. So ideally, we can go for asynchronous, but it depends on use case basis. For me, it was more important to be synchronous. So that's why I use command and wait. Yes, I was waiting for the projection, actually. Okay, if there are no more questions, we can conclude the session. Thank you very much for listening to me. Yeah.